Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. We're talking about real estate prices and optimizing your monthly rental amount today. How exactly do you measure the value of your real estate portfolio? And what's the difference between optimizing and maximizing the amount of rent that you can charge? With Rich Dad Advisor Ken McElroy and I today on Get Rich Education. MC Lobsher is the host of the Cashflow Ninja podcast and president of Producers Wealth. He is on a mission to help you achieve financial independence and freedom as soon as possible. He achieves this by integrating the infinite banking concept with real estate investments to increase your returns and recapture cash flow that you are not even aware of that you're losing. MC shares the number one strategy of investors in his holistic wealth creation course at yourownbankingsystem.com.
Learn the easiest way to create wealth and passive income with real estate. Now you can access the best deals without the stress or hassle of having to find, renovate, or manage those investment properties. Norada Real Estate saves you time by providing you with passive income investment properties in some of the best U.S. markets. Learn more at PassiveRealEstateInvesting.com and download your free copy of the ultimate guide to passive real estate investing. There's no obligation and nothing to buy. Simply visit PassiveRealEstateInvesting.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. You are back where financially free beats debt free, and this is week 2 out of 4 of Rich Dad Month, where we talk with a different influencer from the Rich Dad, Poor Dad world all month. Today, it's Rich Dad Real Estate Advisor Ken McElroy. Next week, Rich Dad Tax Advisor Tom Wheelwright will be back. And then in 2 weeks, the greatest selling financial author of all time, Robert Kiyosaki, will be back on the show. And Mr. Kiyosaki and I will tell you about the importance of investing in real assets. Before we bring in Ken today, look, we all want cash flow for sure. Yet, of course, over the long term, among the 5 profit centers real estate can provide you, leveraged appreciation yields the most benefit. Let's talk about then how you measure housing prices. Housing price indices are closely watched by builders and developers and lenders and investors and consumers, and they all want to assess the health of the U.S. housing market. Well, how do you easily track real estate price movements? There's definitely no perfect measure out there for tracking housing prices, but the Freddie Mac House Price Index is a good one. It tracks all 50 states. Now, the Case-Shiller Index seems to be the better known housing price index, but it only tracks 20 big cities. That's one thing that makes the Freddie Mac Index better than Case-Shiller because it's all 50 states. Today, the Freddie Mac House Price Index shows a national year-over-year change of plus 4.1%, and then Freddie shows the breakdown for hundreds of cities on their annual rate of price change. They also show the housing price change for individual states. For example, just looking alphabetically here, year-over-year, Alaska was down 1%, Alabama up 6%, Arkansas up 4%, Arizona up 6%, California up 2%, and I'm rounding off to the nearest percent here. And then under California, the Freddie Mac House Price Index shows, maybe 24 California cities. For example, here it is alphabetically again, Bakersfield up 6%, Chico also up 6%, Fresno up 5%. You're going to want to look at this. It starts at FreddieMac.com. Now, often the 2 different indices, Freddie Mac and the Case-Shiller, report different housing price change numbers, even when it seems to you like the 2 should perhaps agree with each other. And there are just myriad reasons for this difference in an investment type as diverse as real estate. First of all, there's a significant difference in how they each gather the data. And just knowing how they gather the data is going to teach you something about real estate investing. Okay, Freddie Mac valuations, they come from sales involving conforming conventional mortgages. Case-Shiller gets its numbers from county assessor and recorder offices. Think about how that fact right there can affect the housing price valuation. Now, here's just one reason why. Because I just told you that Freddie Mac gets their housing value numbers from conforming conventional mortgages, well, then that is going to have to exclude luxury homes. Yet Case-Shiller can include those luxury home sales in their numbers since, again, their data comes from county assessor and recorder offices, not from mortgages like Freddie's does. And I've actually done more reading on that difference, and at least in the first study that I found, that either including or not including of luxury homes, that difference was largely deemed to be negligible in the reporting differences between Freddie Mac and Case-Shiller. Now, both reporting outlets do use a pairs-based methodology. What does that mean? That really just means that they compare sales prices of exactly the same homes over time. For example, they'll both look at 654 Cherry Street in Wheeling, West Virginia, 10 years ago when it sold, and they'll look at the sale price of 654 Cherry Street in Wheeling, West Virginia, if it sold again today, and track that price change, okay? Same address. See, tracking the same homes helps house price reporting from being skewed in an era of ever-increasing home size, for example. Of course, this same home sales approach has its limits too, because think about it, over time, some homes are improved. Say that home in Wheeling, West Virginia was well maintained. They kept the outside bright with new paint, and they even upgraded to an ultra-modern kitchen. While at the same time, some homes are improved, others let their place deteriorate. Then, of course, things can get thrown off track because inflation adjustments are vital. I'm always here on the show talking about how people forget to account for inflation. And then you've got to realize that there's something else that skews the numbers. Be aware that there is differential inflation across different regions of nations in the world. So housing prices also say nothing to you about appreciation in rental rates. Now, that's something that you and I are quite interested in. I could go on, and now I did mention earlier that there's no perfect measure, didn't I? In any case, the Freddie Mac House Price Index is a good one to at least peruse, and at most, save to your favorites. I'll see that it's linked in the show notes. You'll see that the site is also a good source of tracking mortgage rates and more. You're really going to love it that it shows the home price index for basically every large and medium-sized U.S. city, and with a fairly user-friendly interface for you. So that's real estate price that we've been talking about here. Now, price and rent, they often have an inverse relationship in real estate, and I contend that this is the one thing that makes real estate great. When the real estate price drops, like it did dramatically in some places 10 years ago, well, there was some lag time, but dropping prices soon meant that people get so discouraged about buying their own home with these dropping prices, and they keep reading and seeing this declining housing market, that they become renters, and that increased demand pushes up rents. And then down the road, if real estate prices begin rising again, well, some tenants are enticed into buying their own home more often, but the income property investor benefits from the rising tide of higher prices, and then you get to enjoy the other side here, your capital gain. So as a savvy real estate investor, as long as you buy right, you can sort of enjoy both sides of this. Housing prices and rents often have this inverse relationship. We're going to talk more about how you can optimize rents here today, as it's the heart of Rich Dad Month with Rich Dad real estate advisor Ken McElroy. If you're a longtime listener, you've heard Ken and I on the show together more than annually. Ken is based in Scottsdale, Arizona, but he and his company, MC Companies, control 10,000 housing units at last check, and they are across multiple states, including Oklahoma, Texas, and Arizona, through his company, MC Companies, where they own, syndicate, and manage apartment complexes. Today, we're talking to a person that has walked through an estimated 20,000 housing units. So we're listening to the voice of experience today, Robert Kiyosaki's real estate advisor, Ken McElroy, straight ahead on Get Rich Education. Finally, Total Control Financial gives you checkbook control of your 401k and IRA money to invest in real estate. It's time to get your retirement money into your own checking account, but you've got to avoid the little-known tax that you'll pay with any self-directed IRA. Instead, it's time for the QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000. For a real estate investor like you seeking an income property loan, go to Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. Over the years, you've heard President Chaley Ridge generously devote her time to you here on the show as a guest. Ridge provides investment property loans in most U.S. states, and you're going to find out how they've helped more people realize their dreams of real estate financial freedom than any other mortgage lender in the entire nation when you get started at ridgelendinggroup.com.
We're Rich Dad Advisors, Josh and Lisa Lannon.
Be who you are becoming. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold.
We're with one of the most influential names in all of real estate investing. As the longtime Rich Dad real estate advisor, he's written so many books in our field, both outside and inside the Rich Dad series, like those purple-colored books, the ABCs of Real Estate Investing, the ABCs of Property Management, and the Advanced Guide to Real Estate Investing. And gosh, I almost feel like I grew up reading that stuff. Today, he still writes and produces tons of popular instructional videos that are worth checking out. Welcome back for your fifth Get Rich Education appearance, the one and only Ken McElroy.
Thanks, Keith. Awesome being on again, man. Thank you.
Here we are right in the heart of Rich Dad Month. It's Rich Dad Week 2 out of 4. And Ken, I think you and I have some commonalities. As investors, tell me, where do you think that you would be if you could not use debt to help build your portfolio?
Yeah, gosh, I wish I would have known that at a younger age. It's everything, honestly. I love the fact that you can borrow debt from people, banks, pensions, life insurance companies, whatever, other people's money, really, and then also get the appreciation and the tax benefits and all that stuff by using that. So debt is everything. It's the best way, in my opinion, to build wealth.
Because when you take out a loan for property, say a 20% down payment and an 80% loan, and your property appreciates, the bank does not get 80% of the appreciation and you 20% of the appreciation. I think there's a lot of actually intermediate real estate investors, people that have been around real estate for a while, that still don't have a good understanding of leverage. So what we're talking about here is if someone bought $1 million building with $1 million and that building appreciated 5%, then that investor's return is only 5% because they don't have any debt on the property. But conversely, if you had a $200,000 down payment on a $1 million building and you get 5% of appreciation on that building just the same, $50,000 of appreciation, well, now you have a 25% rate of return on your investment because you have a $50K gain and you only have $200K of skin in the game. Yes, you do have $800,000 worth of debt on the property, but of course, as a cash flowing real estate investor, you have the ability to outsource every bit of that $800,000 debt. So our point is you get the gain on both your skin in the game and what you borrowed. It all goes to you.
Yeah, it's the greatest thing ever. Not only do you get the appreciation on the gain, but you also get the tax benefits and, the depreciation benefits. You get 100% of those and you get 100% of the cash flow. I mean, you have to pay the debt, you have to pay the debt payment. But if it's managed well and you have a good tenants or residents in there that are paying the debt, I don't know why you wouldn't use it. I don't think people really understand. To me, I've had this chat with a lot of people, including you, Keith. When people all grab their paychecks, on whatever days they get their checks, and they get them auto to put into their accounts or whatever it might be, all that money that floods into the banking system or it floods into the insurance system or floods into a pension or whatever you want to call it, that money that's actually, it really is other people's money. And that money is a liability to whoever has it at the time. We'll just pick on a bank. Let's say millions of people every month put money into Bank of America, obviously through their paychecks. Well, Bank of America's got a liability issue because they now have to pay an expense in the form of interest on those bank accounts to those people that are depositing into their banks. And so the way that banks make money is they have to lend it to guys like you and me. It's an interesting way to think about it because in a sense, that debt, are people's paychecks. It's like a hot potato, the money goes into the bank and the bank has to lend it out so that they make money by lending it to guys like you and I. And then we buy real estate with it. And then our tenants pay off that. And so the whole thing works really well. So if the people just understood that the system is set up, we really are borrowing in the form of debt people's paychecks.
That's right. You have two tiers of arbitrage there. You have the everyday saving depositor that might only get 1%. And now when the depositor puts that money into the bank, that is actually the bank's liability. The bank might lend that out to you or I at, say, 6%. So now the bank has 5 points of arbitrage. They went ahead and lent to us at 6, and they borrowed from that savings depositor at 1. And then the second tier of arbitrage is what we can create. We can borrow at the bank for, say, 6% and invest it at a higher rate. That's our arbitrage. But yeah, the genesis of that all began with the savings account depositor.
I always laugh wherever I go, wherever I fly in, same with you, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Seattle, all the biggest buildings in downtowns have the bank name at the top, right? I always think about that, because that's paying you 1% and charging, say, 5 or 6. That's how they get those big buildings, and that's how they house all those people, and that's how they get the name on the top of those buildings, because they're constantly trying to put money out in the system for good investments. And the other piece to note is banks will not invest in the form of debt for stocks or anything like that. They won't give you debt to buy stocks. In that scenario that you said, the $1 million building, they're not going to give you debt to buy $1 million of stock because there's no collateral there. And I don't know if there's anything more apparent that anybody should ever look at than that. There's a reason banks think that real estate is much more secure than the stock market, yet the majority of people put their money with a financial planner and that money goes into those vehicles. And so it's so blatantly aware to me. I just don't understand why more people don't do it.
That's a great point about having tangible collateral, and shares of stock really aren't. Yeah, it doesn't really take that much thinking. The banks have the biggest, tallest buildings. They dominate. And basically those banks, what they've done is they've created an arbitrage system for themselves. Well, maybe we think we're not going to be as big as a Bank of America or a Wells Fargo, but we can take a page out of their book by creating an arbitrage system. So, we've talked about the importance of borrowing and leverage and all the other benefits, but of course, that doesn't mean that we can borrow recklessly, because our income to service our debt comes from tenants. And I know that you've got some great strategies to increase tenant occupancy and decrease turnover during the duration of your ownership of the assets. Tell us about some of your favorite strategies for increasing tenant occupancy and decrease turnover. I'll give you an opportunity to drop some gems on us here, Ken.
Great question. First of all, once the debt makes it to an apartment building or a commercial building or whatever, really the fun part for me, as you know, I grew up in the management business, is managing that cash flow. And so some of the things that we do, like let's say on a 200-unit apartment building, what we'll do is we manage our lease expirations. So, for example, if you divide 200 times 12, which is 12 months, or divided by 12, I should say, you're going to get about 8 to 10, or about 12 to 15 leases a month on the average. And so what we'll do is we want to spread that lease risk over the life of the year. So, in other words, one of the things that kills occupancy are high vacancy months. Let's say you have something near a university. Well, at the end of the school year, that whole apartment house could dump out, let's say, and everybody goes home for the summer holiday, for example.
Yeah.
So what we try to do is we try to manage lease risk over the term of the lease. So we might say, okay, we're only going to take 12 leases that expire in the month of January, February, March, April, May, all the way through the year. And then therefore, we don't take a 13th or the 14th. So we might do a 7-month lease, an 8-month lease, a 12-month lease, a 14-month lease, or whatever we have to do to manage our lease expiration. And the reason we do that, Keith, is because what happens is, especially this happens like in a lease up or military or schools or something like that, you don't want big fluctuations in cash flow. You don't want a lot of rent coming in on one month and none coming in on another. And you can do that generally through lease expirations. The other thing that it does is it spreads expenses like carpet cleaning and just cleaning of the units and any maintenance and things like that over the life of the asset too, from month to month to month to month. And so you don't have to run and get extra help and things like that in certain months where you have these dump outs. And you kind of learn that. But that's one of the things that we've done repeatedly is just a simple thing as managing your lease expirations over a period of time and making sure that they don't all come up within a certain small period of time. And that can also be month to month, Keith. So once that first year or 6 months goes by, let's say they have a 6-month lease or a 9 or a 12, and then who's ever managing the property, they let the tenant stay month to month. Well, I've seen this before. We bought a property once. It was about 160 unit property. Actually, it was in Tempe, Arizona. There were 90 month-to-month leases. So that actually for the buyer created a heck of an opportunity. But because now I was like, wow, I can raise all these people. Now I have flexibility on 90 people.
Right.
On the remaining leases, as a landlord, you don't have any flexibility until they come up. The lease is the lease and you have to honor it. And so it can work both ways. So if you're buying something and the leases are month to month, then there's an opportunity, if the market supports it, to be able to increase rent. But also it could be work the opposite. If the market is super risky, you can have 40 people give notice, the next month. And so we've seen all of that happen before, where what you really want is you want stability of your tenant base over the period of the 12 months so that you can manage cash flow and expenses and staff and everything really, really well.
That's one of the advantages of when a beginning investor transitions to getting more units in their portfolio. When you've only started out with 1 or 2 rental single-family homes, your income and your expenses can be so highly variable. And you deal with a lot of big apartment buildings. So yeah, likewise, you don't want to run into the problem where you have a bunch of leases that come due at once. Therefore, you might have the problem of labor excesses and deficiencies that you have to work through.
Right. Yeah. And on the smaller stuff, honestly, my experience has been that most of the issues landlords have to do with who they rent to. Legally, we can run credit and criminal background checks on everybody. And we also run sex offender checks on every single person that moves in. And so we're doing, for one, because we can. And it's no different than if you're buying a home, they do the same thing. They run these background checks to make sure that you're financially able to pay. And so we do that on everybody. And what happens a lot of times is people will come up with cash or, they'll pay up front. And so the landlord says, I trust these guys. It's my gut or whatever. And so most of the problems can come from, it doesn't always happen that way. We have properties in senior areas where the seniors like to pay a year up front. And obviously they're typically very good residents. But in some cases, people will take money up front and then they'll have problems, trying to get them out, and they're disruptive and things like that. So most of the problems can be mitigated, in my opinion, by being super selective with the right tenant.
Yeah. Oftentimes that's a red flag. I know it might be a bit different with seniors, but with a lot of prospective tenants, if they want to pay you 6 months up front, that might be a red flag to you. That prospective tenant might think, well, that could be a motivation to you to not do your due diligence and do a background check and do an employer check and do a credit check and everything else.
Correct. So we do about 400 or 500 credit checks a month. And here's what happens, Keith. When somebody says, hey, I'm interested in renting this 2-bedroom very much, and you just have the conversation, you say, okay, well, I'm going to send you the application. I'll send it to email. We run a background check on everybody. Just saying that actually mitigates the majority of the problems, because most people aren't going to fill all that out knowing that you're going to flush that out. They're going to go somewhere else.
Right. Just saying up front that you plan to do every one of those things already weeds people out. Now you just save yourself time and they save themselves time.
Right. And now you're not being confrontational or anything. And you have to do it consistently. In other words, you can't run it on one person and not run it on another. You know what I mean? Because now you're discriminating. I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about just discrimination. If you're going to do background checks, you can't say, oh, I'm going to run one on one person and not on another. You have to make it a policy and run it on every single person. And that is the right way to do it and treat everyone exactly the same.
That is the right way to do it. And there are all types of discrimination. If an investor wants to place their uncle inside one of your units and they want you and the management to go ahead and look the other way on the screening, well, that's discrimination right there. You need to treat that investor owner's uncle just like you would any other prospective tenant.
That's exactly right. And so what can happen is somebody can say, listen, they ran a background check on me and said I couldn't qualify, but they didn't do it on this other person and they moved in. You've got a problem on your hands. You have to be consistent along for every single person that comes through.
Let's talk more about attracting that better quality tenant. When you have the amenities that a tenant expects these days, I think you sort of have what I'll call a multiplier effect. For example, if you have open kitchens, which are seen as desirable to galley kitchens, or if you have flooring with luxury vinyl plank throughout rather than Berber carpet, the multiplier effect I'm talking about is that you can, first of all, attract a tenant to alleviate the vacancy sooner, and then you can also retain that tenant longer. So with those amenities, you've elongated your tenancy duration in two different ways.
That's right. Those are really good points. The other thing, everybody thinks that you need all these fancy amenities. The truth is, most people want a clean, well-lit at night, safe place to live. That's generally what everybody's looking for. And so when you open that door and your maintenance is shoddy and your blinds are not cleaned and you've got dirt on the floors or your carpets aren't cleaned or the walls are kind of patched and not really painted well, or there's missing light bulbs or all of these things. I've walked thousands and thousands and thousands of units. You can tell the difference between, I don't know how many units I've walked, Keith, but easily 20,000. And I will tell you that the difference between walking into something that smells fresh, looks good, it doesn't have to be new carpet or new flooring. It just has to be clean versus, one right next door. If the rents are the same, the people are going to go toward the one that shows the best, just like in anything, just like a car, same thing.
Yeah, it doesn't take too much to figure that out. And then on the other end, there could be the problem of, now you don't want to over improve a unit. For example, you could put $10K in a unit for quartz countertops, and you will get more tenant interest in there for quartz countertops. But, with most tenants, they really can't even afford to pay an extra $50 a month for quartz countertops, and the numbers just don't work out for you.
That's a great point. Yeah, so you can definitely over improve. We see this all the time. We spend about $4,000 to $5,000 on a unit when we turn something, and in the same market, we'll see people doing $8,000 to $10,000 to $12,000 a unit. And so, for example, white appliances, black appliances, stainless appliances, very different in cost. Stainless appliances are significantly more. You're not going to get more rent. You brought up the countertop issue. You don't need granite. You don't need quartz. You just need something really clean. There's ceramic sinks. You don't need those. There's all these little things that you can do in a unit to make it look great. We do things like paint the baseboards a different color than the wall. We do accent walls. Those are the kinds of things. And then what we do, Keith, is we actually, when we're trying to keep tenants, we actually upgrade the units. So we'll say, hey, if you sign another 12-month lease, we'll put a ceiling fan in your dining room or in your kitchen, or we'll replace your dishwasher. We know that it's 8 or 10 years old, or whatever it might be, or maybe we paint the unit or something like that. So we do upgrades to the units themselves to keep the people, as opposed to wait until everybody moves out and then, try to attract new people.
Just like in any business, it's easier to retain an existing client or customer than it is to find a new one. Let's talk about how you might adjust your strategies in both good times and bad times when it comes to increasing occupancy and retaining a tenant. And let's start with bad times. In bad times where the supply of properties exceeds the demand, How low do you go? What do you let people get away with when a lot of people are competing for a small pool of tenants in bad times? What do you do? And that might be adjustments to security deposit or pet policy or smoking policy. What do you do in the bad times when there's a lot of competition to retain tenants?
That's a good question. So it does happen, but believe it or not, it doesn't happen that often. And so what I've found is you got to be super in tune with price sensitivity. So we have a full-time person in our company that monitors prices in all the communities surrounding ours. So we're always checking prices of the 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, et cetera. And we always kind of have a pulse on what's going on in the market. Just because what can happen and what does happen, Keith, is maybe you have an existing rental house, for example, or a duplex, and they put in a new subdivision next to you once people
Yeah.
are buying them and they're renting them. Generally, you're going to find that those are going to be higher priced and also have higher rent for something brand new. So I don't have a problem. We actually just did this. We bought a property. It was about 10 years old, which was across the street from 2 properties that were brand new down in Tucson. The rents were $400 below what the new properties were going to open up for. And so it was a strategic move. I said, listen, these rents are going to be $400 less than the new ones across the street. I know we're going to be in a little bit of a battle because everybody wants new and all that stuff. But I said, if we just could wait it out a year to a year and a half, these rents will suck up at least $150 to $200 per unit as the new ones lease up and the new ones across the street stabilize. And so you can actually do it as a strategy, because what happens is, let's say the rents across the street were for a 2 bedroom were $1,600 or $1,700. Ours might have been $1,100 or $1,200. Those new properties are going to attract new people, and they're going to go, hey, let's look across the street. Here's a really well-maintained property. And so they would come across the street. And so those new properties would be marketing and drawing people to the area. But we were just by proximity getting them to come over. And our occupancy stayed very high because we just held our ground. We didn't have to do any concessions or anything because we're really well maintained, really clean, really fresh. And we're $400 or $500 less a month. So it's been my experience that no matter where you are in the marketplace, you have a position. And the new stuff is typically priced a bit higher than the older stuff. But there are people that are price sensitive too. And so we've never been so annihilated where our occupancies have gone down and we've had to slash rents or anything like that. We've just had to be really conscientious around what the market's doing at the time.
Sounds like, in short, you really keep your standards even in a more challenging market. And then on the other end, when you're at a place where demand exceeds supply, which has been true in a lot of markets lately, what are some of the best things you do to get rent increases? Because typically when demand exceeds supply, that's an environment that's ripe for rent increases.
Yeah, well, as you know, we just kind of came through that. I think, one of the things you got to be super sensitive to, you don't want to gouge tenants, in my opinion. We never try to do gouge tenants along the way. But again, being consistently aware of what's happening in your market is super important. We're in Austin, Texas, for example, and we had year-over-year rent growth of 5 to 10%. So we had massive rent growth for many years in Austin. And so we had this happen. And so what would happen is you can do shorter term leases. You can do 6-month leases, 7-month leases, for example, and just bump them at $25, $35. So this is what happens. It actually works in the opposite. If you have a tenant that, let's say, you renew at the same rate, and let's say they're at $1,100 or $1,200, and rents them now $1,400, you are now $200 under market. And so now for you to raise them $200, you have a chance of them moving. And so you're better off, in my opinion, sitting down with them and say, listen, rents are going crazy in the area. We're going to bump you $50, and then we're going to have a strategy on them. We're going to bump you another 50. We're going to bump you 75. We're not going to bring you all the way to market, but we want to keep you just under market. And so the residents appreciate that, because if they moved, they would pay higher rent. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to stay just under market, in my opinion. There's a couple strategies here. One is if you're trying to reposition a property for sale or for refinance, you might want to maximize the rents. But if you're not, if it's a long-term hold, It's interesting. I listed my house 10 years ago, and I was building another one. And I listed my house, and I expected it to take a while to sell, and it didn't. All of a sudden, somebody came in and did a full cash offer on it. So I was like, oh my gosh, so I'm going to have to go find something. So I went and bought a really cool townhome, small, like 1,800, 2,000 foot townhome, 3-bedroom garage on a lake that I had to move into while I was building my other house. And this is the point. The guy that was living next to me, my house was done and I was moving. He's like, hey, I'd love to move into your house. He's been my tenant for 10 years. I treat him a little bit differently, His name's Bruce. And I say, he calls me up and he said, hey, the water heater's out. I go, good, just go get one at Home Depot and put it in. He's like, great. And so we have this relationship, but I keep him $200 or $300 under market because I don't have vacancy. I haven't had vacancy in almost 10 years. Basically, he's paying off my place. And I think that's worth something. So that's my point about a long-term hold. If I want to sell it with a tenant in there, like on a reposition or a refinance, let's say, then you probably want to maximize the rents. But if they're long-term holds, you're really managing the cash flow as opposed to value. It's a big difference.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it, Ken. It's situational. And then when you do want to raise the rent, it often comes down to communication. So your tenant knows where you're coming from and doesn't feel like you're just trying to stiff them for the maximum dollar. It's about other factors like what market rents are and working with them.
Bruce knows. I had a beer with him. I said, how's the place? Great. Da, da, da. I go, you're several hundred under market. You know what I mean? I just make sure that he knows. He's like, yeah. Like, yeah, I know. He's like, but I've been here. You don't have any vacancy. I go, I know. And by the way, there's something to that. If he moved, I'd have to do all this capital work. He's been there obviously 10 years. I probably have to do carpets. I probably have $5,000 or $6,000 worth of work. I would probably have 2 or 3 months of vacancy. So, you're looking at 10 grand, right? For just being greedy on 100 or 200 a month. So you have to look at that. Is it worth pushing people out to get that a little bit extra? And you got to kind of meet them where they are, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the trade-off for sure. Well, Ken, you've been real influential to the entire real estate community. This is your 5th time on the show. You've certainly given a lot to our followers. Let our audience know how they can learn more about you.
Oh, thank you. As you know, I'm really excited about this KenMcElroy.com. The video series that we're doing. And, what we're doing, Keith, is we'd love to have you on there. We're doing blogs and all that kind of stuff. And we're trying to just kind of like what you're doing, just trying to help people navigate through things and teach them a little bit about education around real estate and debt and equity and all that kind of stuff and entrepreneurship. And it's really come out of the books. We get a lot of emails from the books, a lot of questions on Facebook and Instagram, really, really good questions and, really thoughtful questions from people. And so the videos that we have hundreds of them now, they're literally from the people who are sending us questions. And so it's turned into this video library. We're excited about it. We have a little team here that's kind of working on it. And I would have them start there. There's hundreds of them that are free.
Ken began as a prolific author a decade or two ago, and now that you have the proliferation and the ease of doing videos that you didn't have a decade or two ago, Ken has really helped to bring his books to life in the video, so I really suggest checking those out at KenMcElroy.com. Ken McElroy, it's been great having you back on the show.
Yeah, Keith, thanks a lot, man. Keep running.
Ken is referring to the running and hiking outings that I do there. To review what you learned from Ken today, you still don't need great amenities most of the time, like the Nest thermostat and the Ring doorbell, although I do know of some new construction build-to-rent operations that do have those devices, but simple cleanliness and quiet still goes a long way. In bad times where rental supply exceeds demand, he keeps his standards pretty high and doesn't let in pets with claws or chain smokers. When you're in the opposite place and times are good for landlords and rental demand exceeds housing supply, have your manager have a conversation with the tenant. Let them know the rent will increase, but that you'll keep it below market rent, and that way you will increase the chances of retaining your tenant. Big thanks to the terrific Ken McElroy today. He's such a relatable guy and knowledgeable at the same time. Next week, Rich Dad Month rolls on as Tom Wheelwright returns to the show with me. The following week, it's Robert Kiyosaki and I. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, and I'm grateful as always for your Get Rich Education listenership. Though you might quit your day job, don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
Countless investors get killed on their long-term maintenance costs in their rental property portfolio, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about my friends at JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model that allows clients like you to invest in new construction, turnkey rental property. That's why JWB has been featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and other national media. If you want new construction rental properties in your portfolio, talk to JWB. Give them a call at 904-677-6777 or visit them at newconstructionturnkey.com. The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.